Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast for the common good. This is Tim Gatos. We've never done the podcast in this format before, but we're excited to be here today in a lot that's happening in our country, in our world. I'm really privileged to introduce my good friend, Arthur Karuletwa, and we have been friends for many years. And I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today. And we're gonna, I think, have a really good, heartfelt, deep discussion. Arthur and I go back to his. We both played basketball at the same university north of Los Angeles, a few years apart. But and then we connected in Seattle. Arthur has been instrumental in the sustainable coffee sourcing program at Starbucks for many years, and travels the world and introduces sustainable coffee sourcing to many different places. And we'll hear a little bit about that today. We'll also hear about his journey coming to the U.S. from Rwanda during the genocide, and he landed. He'll talk about this in Southern California, which is where he landed. Played basketball at the Master. Well, first at Ventura, then at the Masters. And Arthur just is a very deep thinker who is always considering the ramifications of what's happening in our society. So Arthur, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. What an incredible platform you set up here. I couldn't be more excited when you first told me about it. I've been really excited to talk to you and to talk to your audience, an audience of incredible movers and shakers, and it's exactly what we need. What a time we're living in right now, Tim. And I think talking to you right now just adds the weight to the time we're in.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can kick off. Maybe just give us a quick. I think initially we were going to talk about more of what you're doing with coffee, but I think there's a lot more things to chat about, and maybe we can do coffee part 2. But maybe just give us a quick, minute of some of the things that you've done over the last number of years in your heart around sourcing and the work you've done with Starbucks, and maybe just give us a quick blueprint, just so folks have an idea of some of the things that you're up to.
Yeah. Well, I've been in coffee for since I graduated. I'm gonna age myself here now, but 18 years now I've been in coffee. It's all I've really done. But interesting, most people in coffee that you talk to, if you're a coffee drinker, you'll know this too, that there's an infectious passion about, the people who call themselves, coffee ambassadors or coffee connoisseurs. You can really tell a seeping kind of infectious joy about what they do, and a really deep passion for the love of all things coffee, and what the art that it is, the science that it provides, and the experience overall around all things coffee. But when you double click on what I do in coffee, or at least what brought me and propelled me in coffee, I often remind everyone how much distaste and dislike I have for coffee. Or at least what got me into coffee is because I kind of detested what it was about. I detested what it represented. More importantly, because I come from a country that grows coffee, and whoever knows anything about these countries that grow coffee, it's quick to see that these countries come from a specific part of the world. It's what we call the equatorial belt. And these are countries that hug the equator, in between Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. And geographically, they're suitable for incredible climates and soil and elevations for coffee production. But if you look closer as well, these are countries that under the UN development goals, for the most part, 90% of them are under what you call the poverty index line. So people are living under $1 a day. And this manifests obviously from their history, and a good number of these countries are former colonies of Western civilization, and under colonial structure, anything that was economically built from an agro-based standpoint was built under uh, cheap to free labor and cheap to free land, and coffee was a key cash crop in that. And unfortunately, even after independence of these countries, that infrastructure is still archaic to this day. It's very commercial driven. It's grow as much as you can at a cheap price and export it all to the West. Almost 90% of these countries that grow this product don't even consume it. So it goes out at its lowest value as possible.
Yeah.
So that said, and these are not commercial farms, by the way. This is not a visual of your regular estate-grown farm or your regular estate-grown Midwest, corn farm, where there's a big combine harvester, pulling out, corn. This is small scale, micro scale farmers who are growing coffee in the size of your regular or standard bedroom, and live day to day. So there's 25 million farmers around the world. My country specifically, you've got a population of 8 million that, predominantly is supported by the backbone of agriculture, and coffee is right up there as a major contributor to the GDP. But yeah, so I really got into coffee because it was a key piece of my people's survival as far as income contribution, but it was also a very important piece to the people's economic identity. And I'll get into that a little bit later here. But that said, when you go through that cycle of low productivity, low quality, and you fine tune the cognitive wheel of what keeps poverty going, it's quick to see just how a country like mine, where I come from, came to be known as the country that had a genocide, a horrific genocide, and to this day is still somewhat of a disdain and a scarlet letter to us. Though every day, and I work every day to champion that kind of work. Every day we try to make sure that that's not what defines us, but it's a very critical part of our history, and like anyone's history, it's important to never forget and keep reminding ourselves so that we don't go back there. But more importantly, we know where we're coming from. And that said, I dove into coffee primarily to, I hate to use the word fix that because not one man can, but I dove into coffee to see if I can play whatever role that I could to, one, selfishly and appropriately reconcile myself with what had happened in the genocide, having lost, 3/4 of family generation, and purposefully as well. Number two, to play any role I could to use coffee and the power that coffee has as a commodity, second most traded commodity in the world, second to petroleum, to be a cognitive wheel of reconciliation, to bring people together. Just as much as it brings you and I together sitting in a coffee shop in Seattle, this same product brings people together in the corners and the beaten paths of little communities in Rwanda, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, you name it. And so it was important that I channeled that same energy that it has in the West to bring people together. Famously coined at Starbucks as a third place, in the same way and in the same breadth and the same purpose, to bring people together in a country that was torn at the fabric of all things humanity.
What was the role you had at Starbucks? What did you introduce for them? I mean, you kind of introduced the program.
Yeah, so all the 18 years in coffee was not at Starbucks. I want to say it was maybe 10 years at Starbucks, 2 years as a contractor, and 8 years as an employee. But within those 2 years as a contractor, and before that, I had been working in Rwanda, building a traceability platform. Traceability may sound all technical and stuff, but dumbed down, it really is just a system that captures and connects the chain of custody of products and preserves the identity of the people who grow it. So even more dumbed down, it's just your ability to follow the journey of a product as it moves through the supply chain. Mm-hmm. Why is that important? Well, for one, we're really connected through the products we consume. Every day we consume, whether it's coffee, tea, water, cup of juice, hamburger, a burrito, a dumpling, a pizza. You see, I just named 3 or 4 or 5 products that you can easily point from where they originate, whether it's the dumplings from the Asian Pacific markets or pizza from the Italian, hills, and hamburgers from, U.S. Staple, and so on and so forth. The products we consume have a way of connecting us and bringing us together in ways that I think we take for granted. The problem is that we lack the ability to connect those dots and keep them in a way that they not only authenticate the journey of those products and the lineage of those products and the evolution of those products, but also the people behind those products that help us connect, that work with us to connect. And, I like to compare that to, a pearl necklace. A pearl necklace is not a pearl necklace without the invisible string that connects the pearls. At the end of the day, it's just a bunch of pearls scattered all over the floor should you disconnect the invisible string that holds them together. And the beauty that happens when you actually connect the products that come to us, you do see that string, you do see that connection of people, and you see the beauty behind what happens when we are connected, truly connected. And so I did that because I knew that Rwanda was not only your pure example of what a smallholder farmer looks like, but it was even further more fragmented in the terms that it was actually, Rwanda is the size of Maryland, a very small country, actually the most densely populated country in Africa. And meaning that the land that we are on, as densely populated as we are, is sacred, and it has to feed that population. So like a beautiful quilt, if you go 80,000 feet up in the sky, Rwanda looks like a tapestry of carpeted plots of land, because every sliver of it is used for agriculture in very unique ways. And so that then, if you go deeper, you'll see that it's really a collection of micro smallholders, really tiny. You're talking about farmers with 20 trees in their backyards of coffee. 200 trees is a big farmer, and so on. So the level of aggregation or the level of complexity to bring those pearls together was even more fragmented in a country like Rwanda. So to be able to control things like quality, or to be able to look through a keyhole and see where this particular lot of coffee came from, a small little bucket of coffee can come from 20 farmers, whereas in a place like Brazil, a whole six-wheeler truck could come from one farmer. So the level of aggregation required a system of sorts to be able to capture the authentic contribution. And I don't use this word lightly, but to be able to capture the identity of each producer, because the identity is really the foundation and the cornerstone of what broke the camel's back during the genocide, but it is also the very foundation that brought the people back together. Because identity in itself, in my opinion, is one of the most valuable assets that you and I, Tim, have, and is the most invaluable asset that people who don't realize that they have one yet have.
Yeah.
Now, why don't people realize they have one yet? You'd think it's a natural occurrence when you're born into this world that you have an identity, right? Well, that's not the case for 125 million people who are living under the poverty line, that are born without that luxury. I call it a luxury because it is a gift. It is your most valuable asset. If you're born without a record, you really don't exist. And if you're born without a record, you can't stack that record. You can't stack that foundation that you stand on. Mm-hmm. And what do the stacks look like? The stacks look like having a name that's authenticated, that is acknowledged, that begins to have self-worth, that surmounts into a sense of dignity for yourself. Mm-hmm. Your name. Sorry, go ahead.
Give us a little background on maybe, obviously share what you're comfortable sharing, but give us a little background on, on what happened back in 1994, and I'd love to then move to. I've got to believe in it, knowing you, Arthur. You've got some pretty profound, deep reflections that could really help America right now. I mean, you've gone through, you experienced something that no one can really know, and then you came to the U.S. and now you're raising a son and a daughter, right? So you experienced something in Rwanda that was, beyond horrific. And then there was, as you mentioned, there was forgiveness and redemption, and you're raising a Black son and a Black daughter in an interesting time now in a different country. I would love to just kind of hear how what's the way forward, for in a really complicated time that seems like we're at an inflection point. So could you take us, share with us a little bit of, how is there anything we can, from your experience, anything we can take and learn and move forward with? I would love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. What's happening in America right now is no different than what happened years ago in Rwanda, that was accumulating itself into 1994. So everything before 1994 has eerie, scary, and haunting similarities to what we see happening here. And I don't say this lightly because it's really the act of dehumanization. Dehumanization is really a process of depriving a person or a group of people of positive human qualities. But it starts there. And in Rwanda, we had, 3 others that followed on with that, and they're slowly creeping up here, and it's very evident. The second element is physical dehumanization, and that's a practice of reducing human beings to non-human entities, such as animals. In Rwanda, that was the case. We ended up being called cockroaches, and that was a term that was pretty easy for Tutsis to be referred to as, whereby when you grow up as a child, you start to believe that's what you are, but also those who are calling you that also growing up believing that that's truly what you are, and that's how I see you. We spray or kill or step on cockroaches every day without knowing it, and we don't think twice about it. And so that's why killing, the genocide was pretty much just that easy. That's why 1 million people were wiped off in 100 days. It was so tolerated, and it was so, even to the international community, it got to that point where when the UN was asked to leave Rwanda and open the floodgates to kill Tutsis, 180 days after that, there were more dead Tutsis than there were alive Tutsis. But what happened thereafter is that the dogs started to eat the corpses. But even worse, Tim, is that the UN peacekeepers that came back started to shoot the dogs that were eating the corpses. So you can shoot a dog that's eating a corpse, but you can't protect a human being that's killing a human being. Well, wait, a human being that's killing a roach. And then the third dehumanization was sexual dehumanization. That is defined as the reduction of a group of people, usually women, to an object for personal gratification. See, all these, as they are, just stack up against one another, but they give permission, like a domino, to take on a even further level of dehumanization. And that's how you give birth to a genocide. And as I raise my children, I can blame hate on an issue of the heart. I can blame hate and racism as a biblical sin. I can, blame racism and hate as a thing that we are taught, not born into. I can use all the excuses in the book, but at the end of the day, it's what they see around them. And what seems and sounds so complex, yet is so easy to extrapolate. Because in Rwanda, it got to that point where we began to understand, that we have to begin to see each other as humans. We have to begin to eradicate the us and them. We have to begin to eradicate what truly means to have self-worth and dignity. But before we did that, we had to first look in the mirror and see if we even recognize the people that we see in that reflection. The problem with our situation was that most of us were born into a system that was already so institutionalized that we just followed suit. And that institutionalized process was having an ID card that said whether you were a Tutsi or a Hutu. I mean, even the simplicity of my ID card that I have here in the United States that says some of the features that I have, whether it's, African American or, you know, brown eyes or, et cetera, et cetera. Those may be great for censorship and what have you, and, analytics of, economic analysis, but they are the beginnings of um, separation and indignation. But what is really also something that we began to understand is when you have those separated uh, uh, kind of qualifications or entities or labels, whether you're tall, whether you're dark, whether you're light skinned, whether you have brown eyes or blue eyes, it is without doubt that economic status begins to separate us and them. You see, in my opinion, when it comes to what you see here and what was happening in Rwanda, it all started with the economic platform. Basically, do you have the resources and do you have the money? See, in coffee, we also equate he or they who have the resources or the money control the supply chain. We equate the banks or the financial institutions to the heart of the human body. And the heart of the human body is the one that pumps the blood in all the other vital organs, just like the banks and the financial institutions are the ones that pump, the blood, in this case, money, to vital organs in society.
Yeah.
Be it schools or political organizations or politicians or the media or educational platforms. And if there is a bottleneck in one of your vital organs where blood's not being pumped into from your heart, then the body goes into shock. Your body starts to wonder, why isn't blood being pumped into my kidneys or into a certain part of my body? And you can't tell yourself, well, I don't need that particular organ, so that's okay. I'll survive on. That's not going to happen. The whole body will not function. And it is the same when it comes to what you see around us or what we saw in the genocide or pre-genocide. So the economics of people started to really be the first building block for us.
That's a really powerful way of just, I mean, that's a powerful picture that you're painting there. Oh my goodness. I mean, were you 18 when you came to the U.S. when you fled the genocide? Were you 18?
Correct.
And what did you begin to see as you came to America, and then you began to obviously plant your roots in the U.S. And I mean, obviously you're sharing a little bit right now, but what was your, and I don't know if you even had any kind of presuppositions about what it was going to be like, but I mean, because you probably didn't even have time to even consider certain things, right? I mean, you came to the U.S., but what did you begin, as you began to plant roots, what did you begin to see around the issue we're talking about, around racism and identity and systemic racism? I mean, as someone who didn't grow up in the U.S., but then you came here, what have you seen, and now how do we even move forward?
Boy, I wish I had a silver bullet for that, but well, Tim, when I first came, yes, I did not know what to expect. I was one of two people that came out of genocide, because truly there really was only two people that came out of those ashes after the last machete went down, and one of those were those who died, and the other was those who lived. Those who lived, uh, even to this day, at least, well, not to this day, but for months and years following that, were just a bunch of zombies walking around. Uh, we were physically there, but big holes in our heart, big holes in our souls, kind of numb, really, not believing there's anything, remotely and divinely watching us from the skies and actually existing. And at the loss of the trust and belief in humanity. So when I got here, again, it's easy to walk around campus as a zombie, and not talk to anyone, not look at anyone in the eye, uh, you know, fight the demons, and drown them as much as you can. Uh, Only until those demons you're trying to drown learn how to swim, and then you've got to, really begin to face them. And it's only at that time, and everybody has their own specific timing, but it's only at that time where you really reach your crossroads and you ask yourself, uh, how do I continue to live, within myself, or how do I begin to make sense of what I just witnessed, or what just happened, and how can I, what big, what kind of size rug can I sweep this under and not ever see it again or deal with it again? So once you get to those crossroads, Tim, you've got to face the chokehold that's suffocating you. And when I came to this country, I was handed a pair of sneakers, given, resources, books, you name it, a dorm room, and everything I needed to play basketball and go to college. But I was given one other thing that was probably uh, my most valuable resource, and that was a piece of plastic. It was a plastic piece of card, a piece of plastic card that was my school ID. And that school ID had my name on it. It had a number right underneath my name. It had the college I went to, and it had a barcode on it as well. And I'll never forget this, but that the empowerment that piece of plastic card gave me was beyond measure.
Wow.
I could walk into the cafeteria and eat as much food as I wanted just by flashing that card. I was on the basketball team, so I would go once a month to the athletic director's office, the trainer's office, and flash that card and get a pair of shoes. Walked into this, massive library and flashed a card, and I could walk out with any of those books, and return them whenever I wanted. And then don't get me started on when I got my California ID, The power I wielded with that was I could open a bank account. In the summer, when I didn't stay in the dorms, I could rent out an apartment. I started getting all kinds of cards from credit cards, getting all kinds of mail. These people knew I lived, and, I'm sure you've opened a bunch of credit card letters and it says, "Dear Arthur, a dear esteemed customer." I mean, the language the credit card uses is beautiful. So they got me suckered in.
How many credit cards did you get at your peak? How many?
Oh my gosh, at least 6. My wallet was full, I had stacked my identity, Tim. I was stacking it. I was amounting wealth just because of what was mine to begin with, my identity.
Mm.
But I didn't know how much value that had,
Mm.
and neither did the millions of people who died in Rwanda.
Yeah.
They were born with one, but didn't know what they had.
So what do you see what are the parallels between what you experienced and what you're seeing today? And what are the, this message you give, my goodness, it's a powerful message. What does it look like? Practically, how do we, you're looking at, protests around the country, and there's a lot of good momentum to see some wrongs made right. Um, and if you were, what would you do? How can we move forward?
Well, during the genocide, the work of the killers was not regarded as a crime. You know, it was actually the responsibility they were given from its administration. You know, so I don't want to by no means say that this administration or any administration is giving permission to that audacity. However, when dehumanization is not curbed or noticed or uh, uh, seen for what it is, and there's retribution around any sort of dehumanization. And I use the word human, not I haven't used the word black or white or brown, nothing, no color. And I intended to finish this conversation without using those words. But for this statement, I want to make sure I clearly continue to use dehumanization, because that's at the end of the day all that we are. And if that isn't seen for what it is, then it gives permission to others to take it to the next level. Because at the end of the day, the simplicity of dehumanization gets boring for some, and they want to take it to another level, because by nature as humans, we are competitive, and we want to show that what is redundant needs to be elevated. And the only other elevation for dehumanization is physical dehumanization, which is what we're beginning to see now, whether it's verbal or putting a knee on someone's throat for as long as you do. And it's scary to think that that could even go further, but it can. And so there's a lot of 400 plus years of the founding of this country that needs to be unearthed. And unfortunately, it's not an overnight process, but it's not impossible either, because colonization was 400 years ago too. And people forget that despite the fact that Africa is still called the developing continent, contrary to the developed continent, that these countries, all 50 plus countries, 54, are young countries that just got independence in the 1960s. So still in the infancy of trying to figure out old colonial infrastructures of social, economic, and spiritual degradation, they are beginning to see and have a self-reflection faster than what you call developed countries. The healing in the authentic development that Rwanda is going through is incredible, but yet not complicated. What is incredible about it is that we decided to look back at what created division, and we eradicated it. No one is a Tutsi anymore. No one is a Hutu anymore. You're Rwandan.
Hmm.
Nobody should be black anymore or white anymore. You're an American human.
Hmm.
And now we have captured the economic pillar, which is linked to the identity of self-worth. And when you have that, you start to stack it accordingly. And when you have self-worth, then you begin to see worth in another. But I can guarantee you that all the people who do these atrocities to another race may look from the outside that they have it all together. But on the inside, at their core, they are lacking self-worth. Because self-worth is not quantifiably with an economic measure. It is a spiritual and soul and intangible value.
Hmm.
And so, from the leader of a nation to a high-ranking political acumen, if there is any capacity in their minds to divide, it is not because they lack anything but self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what we did in Rwanda.
Yeah. Wow. Man, I've got 20 more follow-up questions, but I know I know our time is short because you got to run here, but maybe we could do a part 2. This is really, really profound, Arthur. I'm curious, last question, where did you come around on the God question? And you said earlier, and very powerfully, that when you were, of course, people asking, okay, well, is there anyone up above, right, during the genocide? How did that? I know this you could probably answer it in 50 minutes, and still have a long ways to go. But how did that end up for you?
Well, the majority of Rwanda was, its colonial background was introduced by British and French and Belgian and German colonies, and with everything that they brought, of course, they brought religion, and the dominant religion was Catholicism. And so Rwanda was predominantly Catholicism. And if you know anything about Catholicism, this is, there is an intermediary between you and God, and that person is called a priest, or an archbishop, or a clergy. Very high-ranking people in a church that wear, incredible, beautiful cloaks and headgear, and have a very angelic presence to them, an incredible reverence. These are people you sit in a little booth called a confession booth with, and tell them your most deepest and private sins and confessions. And these are people you entrust with some of that incredible compartments of your soul. And you ask and you hope that they will deliver that to God. They become this intermediary. and they tell you that you are forgiven, and they tell you to pray the Lord's Prayer and a couple of Hail Marys, and you're rejuvenated and you feel good about yourself. And that trust becomes so emblematic and very solid between you and that person. But when it comes to the genocide, when you run to that person, when you flee and seek refuge through that person, only to find that that person and that entity is actually participating in the genocide, it crushes everything you think you knew about God. It completely obliterates that there is a divine, presence that could allow such a thing. When you see children being drowned in pit latrines, mothers and daughters being raped over and over again, and hacking of people over and over again for 100 days, makes all the genocides around seem like child's play. Then you really ask, how long can God sleep and not awaken to see what's going on here? So by the time I left Rwanda, I was the furthest away from God, and punched my fists in the air so many times that I lost count. And so it wasn't until I reached those crossroads I was talking about earlier, where I needed to face the demons that I had been trying to drown for years. And I realized that there was an enemy that I was so angry about, I felt so vengeful for, I was so bitter with, that enemy, though might be either dead or in prison or in exile in some refugee camp, that was responsible for all this, and I was miles away from them, still had their hands around my neck, suffocating me, even as far as I was. And I realized I was giving them the upper hand. Yes, continuously giving them the upper hand. And I realized that I needed to move on. I needed to reconcile. But you see, in Rwanda, when we have a saying about reconciliation, reconciliation is beyond saying I'm sorry. Reconciliation is beyond embracing your enemy, or even reconciliation is beyond the enemy getting what they deserve in a court of law. Although all those things are a step to, but it's beyond that. In Rwanda, reconciliation is that, and a service too. So if I do you wrong, Tim, and we embrace and we forgive and we see eye to eye, and I may do time, I have to do a service, a community service for you that is very is something that you would never think of giving me to trust in, like watch your children, or buy your groceries, or cook a meal for you, have a meal together, or break bread together, and so on. So in Rwanda, that's what we have to do. We do a community service for each other. It's called it's a system of reconciliation that was founded back in the day before colonialism. So we brought that archaic way of forgiveness back into the 20th century. And that's why many countries and governments have come to Rwanda to see how we've reconciled, because they're scratching their heads wondering, how did you do it? Is this really real? Are you guys just stuffing stuff under the carpet, or is this authentic? So we've done that, and we've done that successfully. but I had to do that, and I had to do that authentically and legitimately. And that's what took me back to Rwanda, because I had to look the enemy in the eye and not only embrace, but I used coffee as the key portion of service for reconciliation. And then more importantly, I started to read about what true and authentic reconciliation looks like, but also how true and authentic forgiveness looks like. And as a Catholic, I had never really read the Bible. The only book I'd ever grabbed in the pews was a big hymn book. And when I got into the Bible, I started to read what it truly means, and that's how I ended up in the Masters. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh, Arthur, man, I wish. Will you do a part 2?
Sure. Sounds good.
Oh man, I'd love to just keep chatting, man. Keep diving in.
Yeah,
Some good stuff. I
same
mean, you
here.
gave some pretty amazing insights. So, man, I appreciate your time today to come and talk to us, and thank you.
No, thank you.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Let's stay in
Thank
touch.
you. Absolutely. I only have one request though.
Yeah.
How can I get my Tim advisory board picture on Common Good?
Send me a good picture, man.
No, I was looking at, I saw some familiar faces on there from our first dinner, and I was just like,
Yeah,
oh, look at these guys. No, I was so happy to see that the formation of that and how what you guys